Welcome to Funnel This, the podcast where fintech marketers and founders learn what really works when it comes to brand building and driving demand.
It's hosted by me, Sally Baker. I'm the founder of fintech marketing agency Wondrous.
Follow the podcast on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Just search Funnel This. Joining me on today's episode of Funnel This, very excited to have Shaun O'Keeffe here, who is SVP Growth Enablement at zerohash. I'm really excited because you're going to talk through an amazing case study in terms of owned events in B2B marketing. And I think for anybody out there that is thinking about running their own owned event and has any sort of concerns over how to make it a success, I feel sure that they are going to walk away after listening to this episode with some great practical tips. But before we get into it, Shaun, give us a bit of an introduction to your history in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, been working in the discipline and field of marketing ever since I graduated university, way back when in 2009.
Still a baby, Shaun,
Yeah.
compared to me anyway.
The early tenure of my career, I actually worked in a diverse range of different industries, from data centers, employee benefits. Subsequently, when I moved from Bristol to London, my first role was in payments. So I was working for a company called Railx Payments, which is a payment gateway. I really enjoyed learning about payments, understanding, all the things that happen invisibly, whether it's you or I as a consumer purchasing something with our card, or how money moves, either domestically or globally. And been at zerohash now for 3 years, really enjoying it here. It's blockchain is an embryonic industry, but it's one that's exciting, and especially more recently with regulatory clarity, a lot of the headwinds in the first part of my role at zerohash have now become tailwinds. So it's definitely an exciting place to be there in terms of stablecoin and blockchain disrupting payments, as I learned it when I first moved from Bristol to London.
Yes. Funnily enough, I've just recorded an episode about the future of payments, which will be coming out after this episode, actually. But of course, we had to touch on stablecoin as part of that. But we're here, obviously, to talk about events. So before we get into what creates a successful event, I guess my first question is, why should B2B marketers care about owned events in the first place?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, before we sort of go down that rabbit hole as well, I think it's actually useful to understand the state of marketing as it exists today.
Okay.
In the advent of a world with AI, I'm a big believer, and I've been learning more about this, especially in the last 18 to 24 months, that really the best businesses that win are the ones that have the best distribution model. And ultimately, there's sort of 3 different components of a distribution model. You can either buy it, you can either build it, or you can either borrow it. And I'll elaborate on that shortly as well.
Okay.
But when you think about buying it, essentially that's paid ads. How do you work with, whether it's marketing or content? How are you paying to syndicate that content so you can get eyeballs on it? When you're borrowing it, you're essentially looking at influencers or people who have significant following across social media.
Yep.
And then how can you borrow that audience to ultimately, expand your reach and amplify your own content as well. And by association with those influencers, you build credibility. And then the last one in terms of building it, that's really your own channel. So whether that's your website, your blog, your organic social media, and obviously your events, which we'll delve into as well. I think that's a useful framework. Equally, I feel like marketing's gone too far down the track in terms of everything now is like ABM, demand gen, lead gen, content. That's great. But when I was at university, the basic principles of marketing, the 4 Ps, product, price, place, promotion, too much has been emphasized on the promotion part and not enough on the other elements. And when you take that triple B model that I just walked through, that's how I sort of think about old traditional principles of marketing being applied to this new world where distribution wins. You don't necessarily have to have the best product. Of course, you can't have the worst product as well. But yeah, you see that so many times, and you see that now with companies like Lovable. Their route to revenue is incredibly fast, and that's because they've really honed down on their distribution model. So when I think about events, actually, I firmly believe that you can straddle all 3 of those. When you reverse engineer how typically marketers have done events. So if I sort of go over that in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
Essentially, whether it's the flagship conferences, if you operate in the fintech space like Money 2020, Fintech Meetup, you're essentially, investing in a sponsorship package where you're trying to generate more brand awareness at those conferences. You might have speaking engagements where you're trying to position yourself as a thought leader. That could be someone from your C-suite, for example. And then there's like a lead gen element as well. So whether you have a traditional exhibition booth, but then you're solely reliant on people wandering up to you.
I suppose coming back to your distribution point, that's a borrowed audience, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And then I think, as I was saying, if you have people just walking up to you, you don't really have any control. So the reason I was just going through that item by item is because essentially the key takeaway there is control.
Yeah.
And how do you reverse engineer that so you can have control? And ultimately, that's what I built at zerohash when we had the sort of brainchild of an idea. We wanted to build our own event series where we would control the topics, the speakers, the audience that we wanted to invite. Also, post-event, all of the potential distribution that you can create with the content that you create at that event. So that was like, for me, fundamentally, that's why I think owned events are a critical part of the marketer's toolkit.
Yeah. But I guess, would you still say that should be in conjunction with also being seen out, of course, the industry standards like Money 2020, Pay 360, so on and so on?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. So, yeah, I'm not trying to say it's one replaces the other. I think if you're long in the tooth in marketing, you'll know that it's the channel mix and the sum of the parts that delivers the results, not necessarily one channel.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a great example. If you're at Money 2020, you can actually arrange to meet people and say, by the way, I'm actually hosting my own event on this very specific topic. So in our world, that was, we're going to explore freelancers in terms of some of the pain points they experience when they're receiving payouts from from the work that they do for different organizations.
So what would you say are the building blocks to create a successful owned event?
Yeah, as you can tell, I'm a huge advocate of frameworks. Like I mentioned, the triple V model. So I don't have like an illiterate one like that for this one, unfortunately. But essentially, I think about it in very simplistic terms: pre-event, during event, post-event. So when we designed our Zero Hash Connect event series, for example, what essentially I was thinking was we would have a flagship conference that would have like an annual cadence. And that would encompass numerous different topics under the umbrella of crypto and stablecoin, whether it's payments or trading. And then what we would do throughout the year is have these small niche events where we would really drill down into a specific topic. Like we hosted an event in Cyprus specifically for FX brokerages and CFD brokerage platforms, talking about some of the specific pain points that they experience and how that could potentially be solved by embedding stablecoin technology into their platforms. So that's like the pre-event structure, thinking about, okay, what topics are we focusing on? What are the different audiences that we can invite for these different topics, and our flagship conference? And then really it was about creating a structure. So, having a dedicated website where obviously people can visit, they can learn about the event. You can use that as an event registration as well. You had speaker selection, so who do we want to invite to speak and why, and conducting research, understanding who's an expert on this topic, whether that's going through LinkedIn or looking at where individuals have been referenced in the media with like traditional media outlets as well. Then working with your sales team is really looking at who are the ICPs that we want to target, and then how do we build them out and how do we create cohorts for different types of events that we're going to be running on an annual basis. And then you've obviously got all of your event infrastructure as well. So, the logistical things. We need to find a venue. We need to have, branding at that venue. We need to have a videographer. Those are obviously the logistical elements. But from a strategic perspective, what I was discussing previously is what we're focusing on.
Yeah, so absolutely loads involved really in getting that kind of successful event experience. So thinking about Connect is the sort of series that we're talking about. Why did you decide to do that in the first place? Like, what was the purpose of Connect? What did you want from it?
Yeah, I think fundamentally you want to try and find a gap in the market or a problem that's not being solved. So at the time when we first launched Zero Hash Connect, essentially there was no operator, and by operator I mean a company that provides services in your industry or space, that was providing an event for other operators to come and share and exchange ideas. Obviously, as we discussed earlier, Have Money 2020, and on their agenda there was a section for stablecoins, crypto, or blockchain technology more broadly. So that's what we'd identified initially, and that's what we wanted to double down on. So an opportunity to invite the community to come in with each other, learn about the use cases that your peers are thinking about, why they're thinking about them, and actually take some tangible insights back to your own organization that you could then go and pitch to your boss or implement at your own organization. That was the first part. When I think about why else we did it as well, is when I looked at our pipeline, whether it was deal velocity or where we were getting opportunities at the top of the funnel, ultimately they were based a lot on events. I think events were like 35% attribution to our pipeline revenue. And therefore, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to sit down with the sales team and understand, like, across all of the target accounts that you're currently going after, where are you like not getting any traction? Either the account is not in market, or they're just not responding to any of your communications. So we flipped the script there, essentially said, okay, let's sit down with them, and rather than trying to sell and pitch them, we're going to give you something first. So we would have them in like segments, whether that's like enterprise, mid-market, or SMEs. So for enterprises, we would essentially be inviting them to speak at our events.
Okay.
And what we found is where previously you probably go from like a 1 to 5% response rate maximum as a salesperson, and it would take an incredible amount of time just to actually have a conversation with someone, build a relationship. We had like a 50 to 60% response rate by just saying, I've seen you talk about this topic. I think you would be great for this event that we're organizing. Would you like to speak? It brings down those like emotional human barriers, which is, am I being pitched to, or actually everyone has an ego. It just depends how big your ego is, I guess. I'm giving you a platform to go and champion and tell your unique story. And I think that had a transformational impact on response rates and relationships, because then once those individuals are at the event, you can start to build relationships with them, and they're much more receptive and susceptible then to having more of a sales-led conversation post-event.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, breaking down that audience and deciding how you want each of them to participate in the event. We hear a lot about events needing to be memorable. Was that a consideration for you when designing Connect? How did you want to make it a memorable experience for people?
Yeah, absolutely. That's always a challenging one, because obviously everyone has budget constraints as well. But, in the absence of budget, how we wanted to make it memorable was, if you speak to several people, not just in fintech, but across multiple different industries, when they go to these industry conferences, like, did you learn anything? And quite often the answer is no, not really, or it's just some old information that's just being regurgitated. And I think the reason for that is because when certainly senior leaders or executives are speaking at, I keep saying Money 2020, but obviously that's one of the biggest.
It's an easy example, yeah.
They have to work with their PR and comms team. And so they're quite limited in terms of the guardrails of this is what you can say, this is what you can't say. Equally, as I said, when you go to those conferences, everyone's being sold to. So from my perspective, what made it memorable was, we didn't have any exhibition booth, obviously, because it was just an event hosted by Zero Hash. We designed it very intentionally to be educational led. We didn't have any pitches about Zero Hash. Every session had people from the either fintech community, banking community, crypto community, just talking on stage about authentic topics that everyone had expressed interest in.
And so I suppose you've talked a lot about the type of content that you wanted and the experience that you wanted people to have when they came to the event. And you obviously had some great people come in to speak. How did you actually get people to attend the event? So these people are up there on the stage, and obviously you want to have people there to see them talk. So how did you go about getting the attendee list?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, in terms of like attracting people to an event that you're organizing, and I'm sorry to take a step back, but that memorable piece as well is you need an interesting venue. So when we did ours, we selected the Ned in London, which is like a beautiful historic venue. Actually used to be a bank. It still has a vault in the bottom of that building as well. I actually went there a couple of weeks ago. It's pretty cool, and recommend it if you want to just try a unique experience for a drink sometime.
Oh, always happy for a recommendation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we had for our particular event is we had a lot of people fly in from the US, which actually I was quite surprised about when I heard that. But the Ned has that. It's a venue that entices people. Then in terms of building the list of people that we wanted to attend, fundamentally depends on your goal and objective. So back to how I was sort of structuring it earlier, the flagship event, that's really just brand positioning, authority and credibility. So in essence, we wanted to look at our total list of target accounts and get as many people from those target accounts to attend as possible. So if you have the right topics with speakers that they respect and they care about, then you have a formula to actually attract people to your conference. And how we were utilizing that is, there will be some brand association recognition now that this was an event hosted by zerohash, hopefully that they derived value from attending as well. And then the smaller events, where typically we were looking in the region of 30 to 40 people from a very specific industry or persona, we were leveraging more that in terms of like mid-funnel to late funnel. Mm-hmm. So how can we leverage these events to move people, increase velocity through the pipeline? So what we would do with them is the sales team obviously had a ready-baked list. We would look at, for example, has an opportunity gone dormant for some reason? Everyone gets ghosted at some point in time when you're managing pipeline opportunities. And then essentially, rather than the salesperson, constantly drip feeding them information, whether it's news or news about zerohash or news more broadly in the industry, we were able to invite them to a very specific event that we know they were interested about, because we have like gong recordings. We also have sales insights, which are captured in Salesforce. And therefore, again, it just brought the barriers down. It's okay, come along to this event. I'm going to have at least 2 of your peers that you recognize. I'm a big believer in that. So like if you're targeting, let's say, payment acquirers, you want to have like Stripe speaking on the panel, or WorldPay or Adyen. And then you can go downstream to like the tier 2 ones, for example. They're going to want to learn and understand like what's Stripe doing, what's WorldPay doing that's so successful. So that was that part. And then essentially what we did as well as part of the event, once the event had actually concluded, we organized like a VIP experience. So at the Ned, for example, they have this cordoned off room. And actually, it's a bit like, it's a very, I think, English thing. I hadn't experienced it myself before, but when you're served the dinner, all of the waiters and waitresses, they stand behind every individual. Okay. They then look and acknowledge each other, and then they all place the plate down in like a synchronized fashion. That's like your point. That creates a memorable experience. For those ones, we were particularly inviting our like highest value accounts, where we could certainly see a real impact in year. A lot of these events that you do, obviously we might touch on that further as well, is you're making an investment in your brand essentially. And brand investments, it can be quite intangible. Over a period of time, you'll be monitoring metrics like, are we seeing an increase in website visits? When our sales team are speaking with prospects, how did they learn about our brand? And hopefully your events will start surfacing into those conversations.
Yeah. And how important is it? It sounds, of course, you had a list of people that you absolutely wanted to be in the room. And of course, that's part and parcel of creating an owned event, right? But you've got people talking from the likes of Stripe and so on. How valuable is the amplification from their brands to you?
Yeah. If we go back to that model, borrowed distribution.
Yeah.
So if you look at your own network, so like how many followers do you have on social media? What is your share of mind in terms of brand awareness in your space? And then if you look at potentially customers or partners that you can work with who are more established, have bigger networks, they have bigger share of voice as well, then essentially, once you create an event and you bring that into your event, for example, by default, you are essentially, like in SEO, they call it juice. So how do you use someone else's juice to ramp up your own search engine ranking performance? You're doing that with your event. You're bringing someone else who's got, juice in the sense of that eyeballs, mind share, bringing to your event. And then it's okay, actually, a Zero Hash has the biggest companies, the best speakers at your conferences. Therefore, I should attend.
Absolutely. There's a lot of pressure, of course, on you've had a great event, a really memorable experience for people on the day, but post-event has got to be so important, hasn't it? So how do you follow up correctly and really extend the impact of that event? So how did you do that with Connect?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, once the event had finished, there was different elements that we were prioritized. There's the follow-up with all of the conversations that took place during the conference. There's the follow-up with the speakers, and then there's follow-up from a content perspective. So we would have a debrief session almost immediately after the event had happened with sales team, product teams, any function that had attended the Zero Hash event. And then we would take everyone's notes, and then we would understand, okay, what's the next step there? So, is it that right now they're more interested in information around why should I have a stable coin strategy?
Yeah.
Or are they at the stage where they're like, I'm figuring out my use case, or I'm thinking about how should I build one, or I'm thinking about how do I evaluate the market? So ultimately bringing those insights and bringing them back to the customer buying or decision-making journey. And then what we would do is the sales team would then follow up with content that we had in our repository, providing the right content and insights. And we would do a personal thank you message from our founder and CEO as well, just so it had that like bit of magic and memorability like you were talking about earlier. From a speaker perspective, good example was because we were hosting it in the UK and we did have a speaker from Stripe who's from the US, and we knew that he had a son. We bought him a personalized England football jersey, and we had his surname printed on the back. So not only did the speakers give us value in terms of helping us, create great content at our event, we built like that real human to human moment from that event. And then once you've got that relationship, they're more inclined to want to do more with you, whether that's speaking at future events, if it's an existing customer, talking about, expanding the number of products that they use of you. And then finally, the content piece, essentially, we recorded all of the content sessions, and then we splice those contents into like different buckets, whether it's like themes or topics again. We sent them out to everyone that attended. But back to what we were discussing earlier, it's how do you get net new people to come to your events as well? I mentioned, fundamentally our objective was flagship brands, small events, converting and closing deals, but you need that constant loop of new people coming into the bucket. So then we would then distribute that content across our own channels, whether that was our YouTube channel or our social media platforms. We would email it out to our entire database in Salesforce as well, leveraging a platform like HubSpot. And certainly what I noticed was, again, it's not a sales-led message. Here's content from your peers that we hosted an event recently. I thought you would be interested. You see a significant uptick in terms of open rates, engagement rates, even people responding as well. There's definitely things that I learned and I think I would like to improve moving forward, but we can go on those, explore those further next as well.
We definitely will. I'd love to touch on, though, the feedback that you must have received on the back of it. It sounds like you've, as we've said already, some great experiences. Love the football shirt idea. So what type of feedback did you receive after the event?
One of the best pieces of feedback that I got from numerous people that I'd spoken with is it was fun.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we forget that part, Obviously, B2B marketing, it does get tarnished with a brush of being a bit boring. You have to be professional. I think you're seeing that erode more recently with, some of the content that you see on social media. So when they said to me it was fun, for me, fundamentally, actually, I think that in itself was a definition of success, because if you have fun, I remember when I was back at university, my professor said to me on the very first lecture I went to, human beings do three things: they think, they feel, and they do. And if you're constantly trying to change the way they think before you change the way they feel, you'll never really have the desired impact that you want. So we made people feel like this was a fun place to be, first and foremost. The other feedback I got was back to the point I mentioned earlier, which was actually it was really interesting and relevant topics and content. We made a concerted effort to actually understand what is top of mind or what's on people's lips right now that they absolutely have a burning desire to want to know more about. So whether that was the notes, as I said, we took from Salesforce, or Gong recording, or just conducting our own research as well, probably using some more tools more recently like ChatGPT as well, to understand like what topics are driving most engagement, what topics do people want to hear about the most. So that was the second part. And then the third part was, I think people just liked the fact that it was more of a peer-to-peer exchange. As I said, when you go to any industry conference, at some point you're going to be pitched by a vendor. We made a deliberate intent not to pitch people at the conference, but glean insights, build relationships, and pitching can be done post-conference.
Shaun, I don't know how you had time to do anything else during the run-up to and after Connect. How did you measure success, and how successful was it for you?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question that I've been thinking a lot about recently. I've used human beings a lot, but that's just the way we are. Everyone wants immediate gratification. And I feel like marketing has gone too far down the track of let's measure everything. And I know what gets measured gets done, gets optimized, but actually there's just a beautiful part of investing in your brand that you're not going to realize immediately, but it will start to, as some of the examples I gave earlier, you will start to see that bear fruits and come to fruition at some point. So for me, when I started to go to industry conferences, so I was out in the field more myself and the sales team, one of the things that we started to notice was people were saying, hey, I really enjoyed the Zero Hash Connect conference. And that happened more and more as the more conferences we went to. So for me, that's that like intangible becomes tangible element when you're out saying, okay, we had some impact here. When I look at more back to, let's say, pipeline or dollars in terms of one revenue, we've been running Connect events now for 2 years. The first flagship conference that we did in London, I think we had around $2 million in pipeline that was generated as I don't like saying a direct result of the event, because back to the channel mix, I don't think an attribution model is perfect. You don't pull a machine and say, yep, out comes the money. But definitely we did see that helped move deals through Salesforce. So for example, we had a lot of deals that were maybe at qualifying or commercials, and typically our conversion rate was around 30%. We saw like an increase of like to 45%. We started to see some deals move more quickly through the pipeline as well. And then from a content perspective, what I did notice is as we started to distribute this content across our social media platforms, I saw more impressions, I saw more engagement, probably for the first time at Zero Hash as well. Actually, I saw people commenting on our posts, which is a rarity, especially when you're promoting business-related insights. Obviously, on LinkedIn, we can all share personal stories, and if you get a new job, you'll get 500 comments. But achieving that same feat, we had like a handful of meaningful comments back to our ICP list that we built at the beginning, where we go, okay, we can see this is having a positive impact.
I mean, there's some very impressive and real tangible results. But going back to what you said, first of all, I think you also sometimes have got to trust your gut and know that things do take time to come to fruition, don't they? Thinking about other people that might be starting smaller, let's say, and obviously, as you said, you needed to have a pretty big budget to be able to pull off something like you did with Connect. How might you start smaller if you needed to on a smaller budget?
I think maybe partner in the first instance, potentially. We've actually done that as well now with some of our smaller scale events. If you can find a partner, whether that's like a product partner or like a marketing partner potentially, then obviously you can share the budget 50-50. Equally, there's a lot of advantages to doing that as well. You're not solely responsible on building the entire event, the pre, during, and post event that we just walked through, coming up with all the topics, inviting all the speakers, inviting all of the delegates. You share the burden.
Yeah, you might be able to sleep.
Yeah,
Do it that model.
So that, I think that's a faster track way to go and test the waters. And once you've done that as well, then you can eventually start to ramp up to hosting your own events.
So, Shaun, you've given some advice on how you might start smaller if you don't have such a huge budget, but there must be certain fundamental things that you think absolutely you have to have when you're running your own event.
Yeah, I think if let's say you start small. I'll give you one example. We did a small scale Zero Hash Connect event at the F1 arcade near St. Paul's Cathedral. It probably cost in the region of $2,000 to $3,000, but because that venue is not being used a lot during the mornings, they have this segregated section, and it's a beautiful area. I'd highly recommend it, where they have a giant screen monitor. It's been set up for companies or businesses to host breakfasts, workshops. So that would be like the fundamental thing. Find a venue which equally you can tie to a theme. Now, F1 Arcade is all about speed and exhilaration. So what we did is we linked that back to stablecoin payments for brokerages, where essentially traditional payments are notoriously slower, especially cross-border. And then even our slides and our materials reflected that. Like, we took the F1 car, had it branded with like Zero Hash. So that's for me, that's where you don't have budget. You can find these, I don't know if quirky is the right term, but unique event spaces.
Yeah.
Where people still want to go as well, because afterwards people could race the F1 cars as well, the virtual simulators. So that would be the first point. The second point that's I think fundamental is just speaker quality. If you want people to attend your conference, one of the primary reasons they're going to come is because there's going to be some form of session. On this occasion, when we did it, it was a panel session. So you need speakers that they respect, like I said before. And I wouldn't negotiate on that part. Make sure you get good quality speakers. And actually, maybe you can watch people who've spoken at events like Money 2020 before, and you can actually use that as your outreach. I saw you speak there. I thought you did a really incredible job.
Fantastic. And I guess, I suppose it doesn't have to cost the earth to create something memorable, does it?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's always diamonds in the rough. But equally, I would sometimes we all suffer from like paralysis of just not doing something.
Yeah.
You don't have to have like a home run as soon as you do one of these. I've certainly had instances where we've done events and things have gone wrong at the event, whether it's like, issues with the audio, the video, or last minute speaker, people dropping out last minute, for example. I think you just have to dive in, experience it, understand what's working, what's not working, and what you would do differently next time.
Is there anything that you would sort of leave people with on that note? Perhaps something you've done before that you say, "Oh, just wouldn't do that again."
I guess from my perspective is don't have too much content.
Okay.
Honestly, yeah. I think the first event that we did do in London, we had way too many content sessions, and it was super stressful because we didn't bake in any time for changeover between sessions. People also, one of the constructive pieces of feedback was there was too much content that you delivered in that first event. So People equally want to come to events, as I mentioned, because they want to exchange ideas with their peers. So actually, if you can create an event that, yes, you have your traditional content-led sessions, fireside chats, panels, some presentations or demos, but create these like miniature workshops within inside the conference where people can pre-event say, I'm interested in learning more about how I can streamline my payouts to freelancers. And then people can come with their specific information. Here's how I'm paying them today. Here's the challenges I'm experiencing. And they can actually then engage in a workshop format. So that was a key learning for me. Don't overdo it on the content. Try and find a balance with interactive engagement as well.
Really great advice. And on top of all the advice that you've already given. So what does the future hold more broadly for Connect?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think more international expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So far we've predominantly hosted our conferences in the US and London, and we've done those road shows. We took one of the road shows to Cyprus. So essentially we want to take it to more communities, because again, in the world of AI, building face-to-face time and relationships with other people is probably going to help distinguish and differentiate your brand. So we're going to look at all the major cities, whether they're like fintech HubSpots or payment HubSpots, could be like France, Germany, even like Middle East, for example, Latin America, where there's huge adoption of stablecoin technology. And then we're going to go and take that event brand and try to then build communities in those different geographies.
Getting more people in the bucket.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for that. It's been super, super insightful. But Shaun, before I let you go, I have to finish on the question that I always finish on. So slightly off on a tangent, but founding principles. So if you were starting a new marketing function from scratch today, could you give me your 3 founding principles?
Yeah.
I feel like you'll have a framework.
I wish I should have been more prepared for that one. My first founding principle is, before you do anything, go and speak to existing customers. Depends on what type of organization you're at. Obviously, if you're seed stage, Series A, you might still be trying to find product market fit, but you will still have existing customers.
Yeah.
And what you really want to try and glean from that is like, what keeps them awake at night? Where are the watering holes where they go for information? Who are the people that they trust when they're making decisions, either individually or as a buying group? Which industry conferences do they go to? What types of content format do they consume, and why?
That's really interesting, actually. It's obviously much more than just what problem can I solve for you. It's how am I going to communicate it to you afterwards.
Yeah, it's like if I wanted to know Sally, I want to know what you do from sort of 9 a.m. until you go to sleep. What does that routine look like? I obviously follow you on social media. I know that you do the walks with your daughter to school. So some of those personal insights, and then you can obviously group people into different buckets of what their daily routine might look like, and where I can immerse myself in that in terms of trying to disrupt that routine. I think the days of disruption-based marketing tactics are gone. It's all about how can I feel like I'm just being weaved into your everyday life and routine. So that would be the first part. The second part then would be, focus on the quick wins. Marketing can be a very tough job because it's not always easy to measure the impact of what you're doing, and then going to your CFO or your CEO where they're saying, okay, well, I've invested X million dollars, show me the money. So really sit down with your sales team and understand, get maniacal about the pipeline, understand where you can actually have an impact on that, and then you can showcase that to your CFO and CEO. Equally, when you do that in the future and you go and ask for budget, you have a reference point of saying, I did A and B and it led to C. And then my last point is, really back to my very first point, you now operate in a world with distribution. So if you're not thinking about distribution across the traditional principles of marketing, but also digital marketing as well, then you're probably on a fast road to failure. Equally, if you get that right, you're on the quickest road to success.
Amazing. I feel like that has been a whistle-stop tour, absolutely packed so much content into that. Thank you again, Shaun. And if you would like to connect with Shaun or ask him any more questions, I'm sure your inbox will be open, and I'll put the details of how to connect with Shaun on LinkedIn in the show notes.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Sally. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Funnel This. Follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed it, do share with someone else who might find it useful too. See you next time.